Okay, this should be... I think this is going to be the video that has the big reveal in this. The Royal Academy's dedication rituals. The day after my conversation with Eglantine, I passed more of my classes and then returned to the dormitory. I was barely through the door when Brunhilde raced over to me. Klassenberg had apparently asked to discuss our joint research before the upcoming dedication ritual, but it was already Sprout Day. The ritual was due to be held tomorrow, meaning there simply wasn't enough time. What should we do? Brunhilde asked. At most, we can make some time for them tomorrow morning. It would need to be while the sovereign priests are preparing the ritual, though, and it would not only be brief. Would that not be rude of us? I asked, consulting Wilfred and Charlotte. Frowns creased their foreheads. There are still 2 more dedication rituals up for tomorrow, Wilfred said. I don't see why we would absolutely need to meet before the first one, unless this is just an excuse for them to meet with you, since you're a representative when it comes to religious ceremonies. Indeed, there was a lot we could go over before the ritual, like how to explain things to the gathered students, or how much Klassenberg would need to contribute. Weren't your retainers summoned during the fellowship gathering? Wilfred asked. I assumed all the details were discussed then. I shook my head. They merely covered the steps necessary to perform the ritual. How can this be called joint research when none of the meetings thus far have involved students? I must admit, I would also appreciate the chance to meet those from Klassenberg before we begin. As it stands, Lady Gentian is the only one I would recognize, and only because we will met her during the fellowship gathering. So I wasn't alone. Neither Wilfred nor Charlotte knew the other Klassenberg students involved with the ritual. I continued. Lady Gentian is participating in Wilfred's ritual, correct? Should we not see her before then? I guess we should, but that's happening next week, right? Making time before then won't be easy. Wilfred was due to spend the most time with Klassenberg over the course of this dedication ritual. He and Charlotte were supposedly performing the ceremony for the sake of my health, so I couldn't be directly involved. In that case, Charlotte said, perhaps a short meeting tomorrow morning truly is the best option. If we do nothing at all, Klassenberg might say that we refused to make time for them, even though they were the ones who gave us such short notice. So, for safety's sake, let us respond. It may be inconvenient, but they can decide whether to accept or refuse us. Apparently, it was always better to propose a time, no matter how awkward, than to outright refuse. Makes sense, Wilfred replied. If they refuse us and say that tomorrow morning is too sudden, then we can schedule it for next week instead. Or if they accept, I'll go. I'm the one who needs to meet with them, and you're busy doing all the preparations, right? I'm not sure you'd even have time to deal with them. Charlotte nodded, and as Lady Gentian is, well, a lady, I should go as well. That settles that, I said. Brunhilde informed Klassenberg that we can meet them in the auditorium tomorrow morning, between breakfast and third bell, and that we intend to have a more detailed discussion with them during a future tea party. Yes, my lady, if you would excuse me. Brunhilde then took her leave with not just Brunhilde and Grisha, but also Melkor's apprentice attendant. They were all evidently in the midst of being trained. As we concluded that discussion, Charlotte suddenly looked up. Oh yes, a short while before your return, sister, a letter from Ehrenfest arrived. One of Melkor's scholars and one of his attendants are going to be participating in tomorrow's dedication ritual. Melkor submitted a report for his retainers to experience the ritual in advance of the one to be held in the temple, which Father then approved. They will wear blue robes so that they blend in with their guard knights. Melkor couldn't send his entire retinue or any of his guard knights to the Royal Academy when he was still at the castle, so as a compromise he had settled on 2 young retainers with a good chance of obtaining more divine protections. He also had orders for his student retainers, Charlotte continued. They are to experience the Royal Academy's dedication ritual, then finish their classes so they can return home with you for the Ehrenfest ritual. Upon receiving this order, Melkor's retainers had declared their intention to complete their classes as soon as possible. That was what I'd wanted to hear. And so came the day of the ritual. I ate my breakfast, then bathed, and got my attendants to dress me in my ceremonial high bishop robes. They weren't meant to be worn at the Royal Academy, especially not this often. But Liselda had mastered putting them on me. Brunhilde was observing closely so that she could mimic the process later. Rose, my Melkor's retainers have arrived from Ehrenfest, Wilfred announced. I turned to everyone wearing blue robes and said, if we are all ready to go, let us make our way to the auditorium. Hartman would take that lead as high priest, with my adult guard knights, Melkor's retinue, Wilfred and Charlotte following behind. We were quite a large group. Wilfred and Charlotte also had retainers with them, but said retainers weren't dressed in blue. They were only coming along for the meeting with Klassenberg. As our robe-clad mass started toward the auditorium, I asked Melkor's newly arrived retainers about the castle playroom. Their lord was doing a good job of managing it, apparently. In return, I told them about his student retainers. During the free time they obtained from passing their classes, the apprentice knights had been studying how to identify and neutralize poisons under Lenore and Cornelius, and participating in other forms of training. The apprentice scholars study temple paperwork and procedures under Hartman and Daniel, while Brunhilde takes the apprentice attendance here and there. Of course, this will only continue until my return for Ehrenfest's dedication ritual. Once I return to Ehrenfest, there would no longer be an excuse for adults to remain here at the Royal Academy. Still, we were going to put the retainers through their paces until then. We entered the auditorium, and immediately you saw people with black cloaks and others clad in blue busily moving around. Those in blue were most likely the sovereign priests. Hildebrand was also here with the Sovereign Knight's Order, having once again taken on the duty of opening the door to the farthest hall. He smiled when he noticed me. "Rosamund, you are early." "Oh, but you are even earlier," I replied. "You are here to open the door even though you are not participating in today's ritual, correct? The royal family certainly is busy." We were exchanging the usual greetings when those from Klassenburg arrived. Lady Gentian first greeted Hildebrand, then turned to me. "Lady Rosamund, I thank you ever so much for accommodating our sudden request. I realize this is out of order, but our personnel are very busy at the moment, so please allow me to introduce them first." I turned to indicate Hartman and the others. Our associates clad in blue robes are retainers of the archducal family here to assist with the ceremony. You will see them again during the ceremonies for the lay nobles and men nobles. My knights would naturally remain by my side, but Hartman and Malcor's retainers needed to start preparing with the sovereign priests. "The final meeting will now be held with the sovereign priests," I said. "Does anyone from Klassenburg wish to participate?" Gentian glanced at a woman beside her, then several of her retainers followed Hartman to the shrine. I watched them go before reintroducing Gentian to Wilfried and Charlotte. My brother and sister are going to perform the men noble and lay noble dedication rituals respectfully. They came here today for this meeting. It will need to be brief, but we can have a more thorough discussion at a later date. Has your duchy decided on its research goal for these rituals? There are ancient texts in Klassenburg which we believe relate to old religious ceremonies. To revive them, we plan to study these dedication rituals closely and take note of the steps involved. How does that sound to you? They believed that by bringing back their ancient rituals, as Dunkelfelger had done, they would make it easier for their nobles to get involved with religious ceremonies in general. This, they hoped, would put Klassenburg in a better position. I nodded and said, "You have very acute insight. I wish to observe these ancient records, if you would allow me." My ears had perked up at the mention of ancient documents, and now I wanted nothing more than to read them. Gentian beamed a peaceful smile. "They are too old to be moved from their current location, but we intend to transcribe them. I shall bring some copies to a future meeting so that you can read them to your heart's content." "Is it just me, or is Lady Gentian a good kid? Like, a really good kid?" "Ehrenfest has also succeeded in bringing back an ancient ritual," I said. "Its power is magnificent. Perhaps we could turn our collaboration into joint research by focusing on that theme of revival, then independently focusing on our own ancient ceremonies? We had already recreated the spring summoning ritual, so this would allow us to contribute while also minimizing our workload." Charlotte nodded. "Haldensdale would serve as an excellent example for this research, sister. I can be of assistance as I heard the details from the Gieb and the local nobles." "I would expect no less from you, Charlotte. Your presence is as heartening as ever." We finished our brief exchange and agreed on the theme for our research just as the others finished their preparations for the ritual. The sovereign blue priest began following Hartman away from the shrine, at which point he came over to me. "Everything is ready. I thank you ever so much. You explained the process to everyone, I trust." Melkor's retainers and the Klassenburg students have been observing the preparations. Hartman must have had his work cut out for him, trying to make everything clear to them. Hartman smiled and looked at Emmanuel. "The sovereign blue priests say they wish to observe the ceremony. How should we respond?" Those from the sovereign temple had brought their own divine chalice, it seemed, so Emmanuel wanted to attend the ritual. Without missing a beat, the sovereign high priest began extolling the importance of the divine instruments. Then he segued into a list of reasons why he needed to oversee the ritual, even declaring that he now had a right to participate. I shook my head. I need not remind you what happened to the sovereign blue priest who attended the Archduke Conference dedication ritual. To prevent that from happening again, I must ask them to stay away from today's dedication ritual for archnobles and archduke candidates. For safety's sake, only those who are participating are allowed to stay. This rule applies even to guard knights and members of the royal family. If you are truly insistent, bring the sovereign chalice to the lay noble's dedication ritual. The mana flow then would surely be weak enough for the sovereign blue priest to handle. Embittered, Emmanuel picked up the sovereign temple's chalice and took his leave. I went with Wilfried, Charlotte, and Gentian to the farthest hall, whereupon I checked the statues, red carpet offerings, divine instruments, and so on. The Klassenburg students did their best to note down everything I was looking at. Then once I was done, I told Hildebrand that everything was ready so he could contact the royal family. Thus concluded the last preparations for the first of the Royal Academy's dedication rituals. Dang it. I got some of my... There we go. Lady Gentian, please return to your dormitory before the participants arrive, I said. If she lingered, she would lose her chance. Once the ritual is over, I would advise you to consult with them to find out how things went. Gentian thanked me, then left alongside Wilfred and Charlotte. The royal family arrived in the same manner as last time. We exchanged greetings. Then King Trollcall turned to me and said, I understand this ritual is a burden on both Klassenberg and Ehrenfest. Allow me to express my appreciation that you would cooperate nonetheless. It is an honor to be of use to the Zent, I replied. I see you have brought the same members of the royal family as last year. Once the royal family had entered, the archnobles and archduke had started doing the same, but only after my shield of wind had given them a pass. In the end, not a single participant was refused. I assumed that after seeing what had happened last year, the other duchies had decided not to send those at risk of being turned away. Students of several duchies thanked me for my input on regenerating the gathering spots and asked me to share with them the most efficient form of prayer for obtaining more divine protections during their graduation. It was nice to see others treating religious ceremonies more positively. It is best to pray not for your own sake, but for someone else's, I said. Might I suggest that you and someone you care about start praying for each other? That is easy for you to say, Lady Rosemine, one girl murmured, looking downcast. You have a partner who would give you such a wonderful hairpin. I, on the other hand, am still unengaged. No, I'm so sorry. It need not be a romantic partner. You could pray for your parents, other family members, or even a friend. In fact, it need not even be a person. Archducal families pray for their duchies, after all. Friends. I see. I thank you ever so much, the girl recovered, then followed Melkor's retainer to her designated spot. Last year, we had arranged the participants in a donut shape around the chalice, but now we were facing the shrine with the royal family at the front, the archduke behind them, and the archnobles at the back. Only those who had volunteered to participate were gathered this time, but we were no longer limited to scholars. There were knights in attendance here too, resulting in quite the crowd. Once everyone was inside, the doors were shut and the ritual could commence. Hartman began the opening speech, had everyone kneel, then rang his bell. The High Bishop shall now enter, he said. As I made my way to him, surrounded by my guard knights, a thought ran through my mind. This might be my first time performing a dedication ritual at a shrine with statues of the gods. Even the ones in Ehrenfest are held in the noble section's ritual chamber, not the chapel. Dang it. Hang on. I hit a button. I wanted to make sure it didn't stop recording. I walked the path leading through the gathered students and past the royals and came to a stop at the very front of the room. My knights were all carrying mana-filled stones, which would ease the burden on them as they knelt with me by the shrine. My eyes wandered the room, then I exchanged a glance and a nod with Hartman. He sat down his bell, moved next to me, and swiftly knelt. I went down too and pressed my hands against the red carpet. I am one who offers prayer and gratitude to the gods who have created the world. And once our participants repeated the prayer, the students who had taken part in last year's dedication ritual and the adults who had taken part during the Archduke conference must have explained the process to them. It was a smooth start, to say the least. Light began to illuminate the carpet underneath us before gathering into waves that raced up the shrine. Today's ritual was being carried out entirely by mana-rich nobles, so the light moved faster than I was used to seeing back in Ehrenfest. It wasn't long before even the shrine was dazzlingly bright. More and more mana flowed toward the shrine, and the face stones embedded in the divine instruments carried by the pure white statues began to shine their respective divine colors. It was the first time I'd seen this happen. We honor you who have blessed all beings with life, and pray that we may be blessed further with your divine might. In the blink of an eye, pillars of each divine color shot out of the instruments. They went straight up into the sky, curved around one another, until they had formed a single mass, then flew away. Wow, things sure do get flashy when you involve lots of divine instruments. Lady Rosemine, I am nearing my limit, Daniel said, sounding exhausted as he knelt on my other side. He took his hands away from the face stone and the carpet. Thus concludes the ritual, I announced. Everyone, please remove your hand from the floor. I didn't expect all the divine instruments to shine, but I'm glad nothing else happened. A sigh escaped me. The royals must have been relieved too, especially after my warning that something unexpected was going to happen, but they looked more underwhelmed than anything else. After a short break to rest and drink rejuvenation potions, the students began leaving the farthest hall. The royal family drained the mana from the chalices and the face stones and gave them to the guards, while the sovereign priest put everything away. Zent Chorokol, I said, could some of the mana be given to the library? Professor Hortensia is not working there this year, so I expected to be experiencing a shortage. Father, we certainly do not want the library to run out of mana, said Giswell uttered in support of my suggestion. Please do share some with Rosemine. The Zent agreed without hesitation, at least in part thanks to that great assist from the first prince. How shall we have it transported to the Royal Library, said Giswell asked. My chalice will do, I replied. Erdegrall. As mana was poured into my newly made chalice, Anastasia shook his head and muttered, "As always, common sense does not apply to you." Well, what do you expect, dude, at this point? The others agreed with him, which made me very tempted to protest. I wasn't the only one who could produce divine instruments with their staff. I shouldn't rock the boat, though. Starting an argument now would only cause problems. Once my chalice was full of as much mana as Wade donated to the library's Vaystones last year, I told my retainers that we were going to see Solange. Lenore sent an ordinance ahead of us, while Cornelius and Daniel picked up the chalice. As I recalled, a member of the royal family had needed to oversee my previous donation, so I turned to look at the royals. I shall observe, Siggiswald said upon meeting my eye. I didn't care who filled the role, so I gave him my thanks, and we set off. We made our way to the end of the auditorium, and the students waiting outside took a quick step back upon seeing us. My retainers were all dressed in blue robes, so maybe onlookers assumed they were from the temple? Or maybe it was just because Siggiswald was taking the lead? We continued to turn heads as we reached one of the hallways leading to the central building, and that was when I caught sight of the magic circle in the sky above. It was shining brightly. I instinctively stopped and stared out the window. Eep, I knew it. Praying to the shrine in the farthest hall really did trigger something. Mana had filled the magic circle, which now looked ready to activate at any moment. I could guess that one last nudge would set it off. But what could that final nudge be? Praying one more time? I desperately wanted a hint of some kind, but without Hortensia and the key in her possession, I wasn't sure we could be able to enter the underground archive. Rosamond, is something wrong? Siggiswald asked. He had stopped in his tracks and was now giving me a look of concern. That is quite the frown. Having deduced that he couldn't see the circle above us either, I shook my head and continued down the hall. I am just terribly worried about Professor Hortensia being absent this year. She manages one of the keys to the archive, does she not? Are there any art scholars who could oversee it until she returns? It was my very subtle way of hinting that we wouldn't be able to enter the underground archive unless the situation was remedied. Siggiswald gave a conflicted smile. Roblot had to do a lot of convincing to get Hortensia in the library in the first place. Plus, we only found out about her poor health just before the start of the term. Arranging her replacement will take some time. That said, there have been calls for Gentian of Classenbrook to be allowed into the library committee. To my knowledge, she plans to register as soon as her classes are finished. That should take care of the key. Still, I was worried about Schwartz and Weiss's mana supply. More committee members would also help ease Solange's loneliness, but will it be possible to enter without any arch-noble librarians, I asked? That is not something I can answer without first testing it. True. With that, we arrived at the library. Solange and Siggiswald exchanged greetings while Schwartz and Weiss hopped around me as usual. "Milady is here. Read, milady." "Oh my," I said. "This is a most enticing offer, but I am only here to donate some mana." Solange smiled warmly. "I am always grateful for your consideration, Lady Rosamond." Then she guided us to the magic tool serving as the library's foundation of sorts. "You received a Vaystone from Professor Hortensia, correct? Allow me to refill that first. I would hate for Schwartz and Weiss to run out of mana before those of the library committee finish their classes." "That would be tremendously helpful. I expend most of my mana simply carrying out my everyday duties." I took the Vaystone from Solange and soaked it in my chalice. The mana that remained was then poured over this same large Vaystone as last year. Its rainbow colors grew more vivid, which probably meant to be fine for the time being. And that should do it. What a productive day. Siggiswald was peering at the magic tool with great interest, but I merely sighed and reabsorbed my chalice. It was then that Schwartz and Weiss tugged on my hands. "Gramps needs mana, milady. Gramps is calling." "Oh, right. Professor Hortensia is absent, so nobody's supplying that statue. Professor Solange, would it be acceptable for me to give it some mana? I'd entrusted the duty to Hortensia when she'd started working here, but something had to be done while she was away. We didn't want crucial parts of the library to stop functioning overnight." "If you are able to, Lady Rosamond, then I would welcome it," Solange said apologetically. "As a mere net noble, it's impossible for me to supply all the magic tools on my own." Uh-oh, here we go, guys. She really was having a tough time without Hortensia. Prince Siggiswald, I must go up to the second floor for a moment to supply a magic tool," I said. I'd imbibed a rejuvenation potion after the dedication ritual, so my mana levels were doing fine. "You truly do care about this library," he said. "To be frank, I did not know you were giving it so much mana." I smiled and nodded, then climbed upstairs with my retainers and the shoe mills. Supplying mana to the Gramps person was as simple as approaching the statue of Mestanora and touching the face stones embedded on the Groteshite. It was holding. And indeed, no sooner had my fingers brushed at them than my mana started flowing out of me. I allowed this to continue, unsure how much mana the statue needed, until a magic circle suddenly arose clearly in my mind. It began to shine, obscuring my vision. Uh-oh. Here we go. I squeezed my eyes shut on instinct. Even in the darkness, the circle was clearly visible. This feels like when I learned to make the divine instruments. As soon as that thought entered my mind, I felt my body rise up in the air. My eyes shut open as I frantically tried to get my bearings. What? For some reason, I was alone, standing in a pitch-dark space. Yep, here we go. Meeting Gramps. Where am I? I gazed around, but there was only darkness. Where had my retainers gone? It was probably best to assume that I'd been teleported somewhere on my own. I supplied mana to the statue of Mestinora. A magic circle appeared, and then I ended up here, I muttered. This was kind of like when I was pulled into those shrines, I guess. But even then, I'd at least encountered statues, indications that I should start praying. Here in the darkness, I didn't know what was happening or what to do. Getting locked in a library is one thing, but I don't want to perish in an infinite void of eternal darkness. I carefully reached out my hand, trying to probe my surroundings. There was no walls around me, meaning I wasn't stuck in a box at least. Then I crouched down to find out what I was standing on. There was something hard, a floor of some kind. Ah. Starting from my fingertips, lines of mana began stretching out across the floor. As I continued to move and expand, I was afforded a better view of where I was standing. Either my surroundings were hidden by darkness that needed to be washed away, or my mana was actually creating them. I removed my hands from the floor in shock, but the darkness continued to recede. The most I could do was watch as scenery formed around me. In spreading waves, a thick carpet that seemed perfect for absorbing noise spread out underfoot, then suddenly dropped off at a specific point. I was inside a cylindrical building with a spiral stairway that descended along the circular wall. Once the growing wave reached the walls to my left and right, it began expanding upward instead, creating bookshelves packed tightly with books. They extended all the way to the ceiling before expanding infinitely to the sides. The darkness had shrouded a massive building with books on every wall and a dizzying spiral staircase. What is this place? A paradise given to me by the gods? I can understand her thinking that. My eyes flitted all over the place. This truly was overwhelming. Not once since my arrival in Jurgensmith all those years ago had I encountered such a tremendously vast collection of books. Sure, seeing the Royal Academy's library had moved me, but this dwarfed it. The sight before me was like a foreign library I'd only seen in pictures. Ah, books, books! From here to there, top to bottom, nothing but books! By offering my mana to the goddess of wisdom, I'd obtained entry to a genuine utopia. My appreciation and admiration for Mestinora could no longer be expressed with words alone. I needed to do something much, much grander. Praise be to Mestinora, the goddess of wisdom! My elation practically erupted into a blessing of epic proportions. Then, with an uncontrollable smile on my face, I bounded up to the nearest bookcase and reached out to stroke one of the countless volumes adorning its shelves. But instead of touching a luxurious cover, my hand struck the surface of a flat wall. My mind went blank. I couldn't pick up any of the books. It was like the shelves were all painted on. I slapped one after another, but there was no way to get any books out. No! What treachery is this? My hopes were raised to extraordinary heights and then crushed to tiny little pieces. This is too cruel. Too cruel. Give me back my special prayer. I wanted to give Mestinora a piece of my mind. How could she fill me with such euphoric joy one moment and then put me on the brink of despair the next? Art thou one who seekest knowledge? I am, I shouted, tears in my eyes. From the very bottom of my heart, I want to read. Wait, who said that? There was someone else here. Which meant someone had seen me act in a way entirely unbefitting an archducal family member. This is bad. Like, really, really bad. I instinctively treated this place like one of the divine shrines and allowed my true feelings to bubble to the surface. Cold sweat ran down my back. This truly was a blunder of epic proportions, so as I turned around to see. What? A golden shoe mill. It was the same size as Schwartz and Weiss, except this one seemed to speak fluently. Then follow, thou who seekest knowledge. The golden shoe mill started down the spiral staircase, and at great speed. It descended at least 5 steps with each hop. I didn't know how far down I was expected to go, but I was on the top floor of a massive cylindrical library. Attempting the journey on foot would surely be impossible. I carefully looked around and climbed into my high beast. That was fine, right? There was nobody else around, after all. Where are we? I asked as we made our way down. Are you the Gramps person Schwartz and Weiss told me about? I think they said you were waiting or calling for me. This place reflects its visitors' desires, the golden shoe mill replied without stopping or even glancing back at me. We confirm the will and qualifications of those who arrive seeking knowledge. Then we send them on their way. Your will has been confirmed. Huh? So this place, this building of books from floor to ceiling, was my most prominent desire? I suppose I did say I would rather be trapped in a library than a pitch-dark void. Mestinora hadn't actually been involved. From what I could tell, I silently apologized for getting unnecessarily excited, unnecessarily blessing her, then falling into unnecessary despair. Oh, so are you Gramps or not? This place reflects its visitors' desires. We confirm the will and qualifications of those who arrive at seeking knowledge, then we send them on their way. Your will has been confirmed. You already said that. I don't think it can say anything else. The golden shoemill repeated the same answer no matter what I asked. Perhaps its fluent speech came at the cost of variety? As it turned out, the library wasn't actually infinite. We descended maybe 3 or 4 stories worth of stairs before we reached the bottom. Before us now was a door decorated with 7 face stones. Touch the door, the shoemill said. If you are qualified, it will open. I really didn't want to. Getting blasted away by the door in the underground archive was still fresh in my mind. I'm not registered as a member of the royal family. Touch the door. If you are qualified, it will open. And if it not, then oh well. Attempting to communicate was pointless, so having no other choice, I cautiously climbed out of my high beast and approached the door. I made sure to touch it only for the slightest moment lest it hurt me, but my fears proved unfounded. A single face stone lit up red. Seems safe. I touched the door again, this time holding my palm flat against it. The face stones all shone, then the door automatically opened inward, revealing an iridescent film that blocked my vision of whatever lay behind it. I was wondering where it led, still on guard, when the golden shoemill came and stood next to me. Thou seeker of knowledge, who hast been recognized by the gods, go forth. That which thou seekest lies beyond. Right, time to read at last. I got back into my high beast, plunged through the film, and emerged in what appears to be a rocky cave. An ivory path glowed faintly underfoot, showing me the way forward. I dashed ahead and soon arrived at an ascending spiral staircase, which was also ivory. It reminded me of when I'd sought my divine will as a first year. Back when I'd come across an identical staircase. I think this might be where you're at. Leading to the Garden of Beginnings. This place feels familiar, I murmured. Am I going back to the Garden of Beginnings? As I made my way up, my suspicions were confirmed. This really was the same staircase. I was now back in the circular plaza surrounding an ivory white tree. This is where I'd found my divine will when obtaining my staff. But there wasn't anything of note here this time. It was as uneventful as when I'd come from my divine protections class. It seemed to me that nothing was going to change no matter how many times I returned. The trunk of the massive ivory tree stretched all the way up to the top of the space, where many ivory branches were splayed out. From what I could see, it was stretching toward a large hole through which sunlight streamed and decorated the ground with shadows. Well, here I am again. But what am I expected to do? There isn't a single book as far as the eye can see. The golden shoemill had told me I would find what I wanted, so where were the books? I climbed out of my high beast and tried searching around the tree. Finally back, I see. Huh? You weren't here before. A voice interrupted my thoughts, but there was nobody else around, was there? I was immediately reminded of my blunder in front of the golden shoemill, so I racked my brain for anything embarrassing I might have done. I was pretty sure I was safe. I mean, I didn't do anything unladylike, right? I examined my surroundings, taking care to act more like an Archduke Karen, and that was when I noticed it. The tree in the center was slowly morphing into the shape of a person. What? The phenomenon was so unexpected that I instinctively stepped away. To be honest, I didn't have a clue what was happening. It was bad enough that there weren't any books here, but now I was having to endure these strange goings-on. At this point, I just wanted to leave. Where's the exit? I turned to flee, but the hole through which I'd entered was gone. There was no escape. I was trapped in the circular plaza. I might not know what I'm looking for, but I do know it's strange. My warped common sense can't even begin to comprehend it. And this is her knowledge of Earth and all its fantasy stuff. You would think that something like that would have not jogged her memory, but been sort of familiar to her. In a way. I mean, this is fantasy we're talking about here. My mind was racing. I really wanted to know whether this kind of thing was normal in Jurgensmith, but before I could even hope to get any answers, the tree finished its transformation. Before me now was a tall, slender man who appeared to be in his late 30s. He was pale as ivory from head to toe, his skin, his long hair that flowed down past his waist, and even his clothes were blindingly white. The frown lines across his forehead made him look a little high-strung, but maybe that was just because they reminded me of Ferdinand? Indeed, the tree had taken the shape of a person, but it was still clearly a tree. You are late, the figure said, his eyes closed. What in the world were you doing? The foundation is running so dry that only a faint layer of mana is now covers Jurgensmith. I am sorry? We'd never met before, so I wasn't sure why he was getting mad at me, so I decided to play it safe and apologize. This is no ordinary man, and there was no knowing what he might be capable of. He had said that I was late, so he must have been waiting for me. Maybe he had even summoned me? Might you be Gramps, I asked. Gramps? Ah, how long has it been since I was last called that name? So I was right. I stared at the ivory man whom Schwartz and Weiss had previously described as old and powerful. Being careful and polite was definitely the right call. Gramps, I said, somewhat hesitant to address him so casually, may I ask a question? Allow me to ask one first. Your vessel appears much smaller than the last time you were here. Was a strange curse of some kind put on you? A curse? I repeated. I wanted to find out more about Gramps, but he interrupted my efforts with that unusual question. Was I cursed? Your current vessel will not be large enough to hold everything. Now how bothersome. Would you care to elaborate? There were so many things I wanted to ask. My current vessel? Large enough to hold what? Gramps did not answer me, though. Instead, he turned to the hole above us, standing as straight as a board, and said, Could you give me a helping hand? Onwalks. An instant later, blue light began to rain down upon me. Onwalks? Isn't he the god of growth? That was a pretty casual way of addressing it. I gasped, torn from my absent-minded thoughts. By a sudden sharp pain, my bones were creaking under the fresh strain placed upon them. My muscles were crying out as if someone was grabbing and stretching them. My body was starting to change. Ow, it hurts. Gramps, it hurts. You must endure it. So mean. It was bad enough that he'd asked Onwalks to intervene without my permission. Now he was telling me to suck it up? I wanted to complain, but the blue light kept raining down on me, and the pain shooting through my entire body became too intense for words. All of a sudden, the suspenders around my waist, meant to keep my socks up, started to feel unbearably tight. It was digging into my flesh and making it hard to breathe. Dazed and weeping from the pain, I tore away the belt, holding my high beast face down in rejuvenation potions, removed my high bishop sash, and wriggled out of my ceremonial robes. Then I pulled up the skirt that I'd been wearing underneath and undid the suspenders while loosening my underwear. I was finally able to breathe again, but that was far from the end of my discomfort. I could now feel something tugging on my scalp. My hair was locked firmly in place with hair gel, which had to be the reason. Unless I washed it out, the pain really worsened. Wash, and I exclaimed, and started pulling out my hairpins from under the rushing water. As the gel quickly lost its hold, the cords came loose, and my hair came undone on its own. Again, I was allowed only a brief moment before the pain returned. My toes were crushing up against the inside of my shoes, which felt unbearably tight all of a sudden. You're growing. Of course it's gonna hurt. Your shoes are too small for you now. I was able to free my feet in the nick of time, but it wasn't enough. Now my socks were getting tight. At this rate, I was going to lose all circulation in my legs. Messer, I said, turning my staff into a knife before slicing through my socks in a single swoop. This kind of recklessness was only an option because nobles couldn't hurt themselves with their own straps. Keeping up the momentum, I sliced through the straps on the back of my clothes. They tore open with a dull ripping sound, revealing bare skin. Then the fabric around my arms started to tighten, so I quickly freed my torso of any remaining outerwear. My chest was now larger than it had ever been on Earth, and my underwear was so restricted that I actually had cleavage. But a few cuts to the material under my arms alleviated the issue. The whole experience made me so relieved that I was wearing bloomers. Although they feeling tighter than before, I wouldn't need to remove them. At least I managed to hold on to some of my dignity. I was dangerously close to ending up naked. Of course, I was only able to think that because I'd grown up on Earth. From the perspective of a Jurgenschmidt noble, my current predicament was still extremely shameful. This was an unimaginable, cruel act to inflict upon a fair maiden. I mean, I did pray to get bigger, but not like this. At some point, the blue light finally vanished. So did the pain that had racked my body. I suppose that I'd finally stopped growing. I glared up at the sky from whence the light had come, and that was when my exhaustion truly hit me. It was better than being in agony, at least. I need a rejuvenation potion. I chugged a kindness-filled potion, then reached for my ceremonial high bishop robes. They had been made with my eventual growth in mind, so I assumed they would continue to fit me as long as I released the hems. We had done this to save money, in the long term, not in anticipation of such a bizarre situation, but still, I wanted to give my past self a round of applause. First I undid the hems, then I attempted to put on my sash. I couldn't tie it as prettily as Lysletta and the others, but it didn't matter. My only concern was not having to return home in my underwear. As a weary sigh escaped me, I realized that the ivory man who had asked Onwalks to do this for me in the first place hadn't moved a muscle. He was still standing bolt upright. I shot him a very stern glare. Gramps, you saw me undressed, didn't you? I am not your form. I see not your form. I see only mana. Huh? I was taken aback for a moment, but it was true that his eyes had remained shut the entire time. Your vessel has grown at least, Gramps continued. You can now hold more than you could before, which is good. And you came here via the proper route. I must commend you for learning some degree of manners. Before? The proper route? Hold on. He must be mistaking me for someone else, right? Is that why he did this to me? It was no wonder that we'd ended up in this situation. He hadn't even looked at me. Excuse me, I ventured. Hurry up and create your stat. Prayers must be offered. Hold on. I think Jurgenschmidt can wait no longer, he interrupted, sounding strict all of a sudden. You must hurry. Understood, I replied on instinct, then produced my staff. Since my arrival to this world, I'd prayed more times than I could count. Doing it again felt like a small price to pay to get Gramps to listen to me. but the moment it conceded and took out my staff, one divine color after another began shooting from its tip. Beep. The colors, 7 in total, ended up floating in a rainbow circle above me. They hovered at my chest about a meter in diameter. The more time seemed to pass, the more vivid each of the colors became. They changed form into 7 rectangles, eventually becoming the tablets I'd obtained from the Royal Academy's shrines during the Archduke Conference. Straight in front of me was the blue tablet, the first one I'd obtained. The word it had taught me spilled from my mouth all on its own. Kravetark. The tablet turned into a thin pillar of light. Then, as if on cue, the remaining tablets rotated clockwise until another one was floating in front of me. It was prompting me to say its word. Uwilladeel. The process repeated. A new tablet moved in front of me. I said the name associated with it, then the tablet turned to light. Tidehinder. Nagunch. Tolerakit. Ostrog. Becker. Once I was done and there were 7 lights surrounding me, Gramps slowly looked upward, eyes still closed. I gazed up as well. Because the giant ivory tree had transformed into a much smaller ivory man, the huge hole above us was now fully visible. Through it I could see a patch of blue sky. Pray to the supreme gods and the 5 primaries, Gramps said. From the bottom of your heart, beseech them to let you borrow Mastanora's wisdom. There was no reason to protest, so I did as instructed. I dropped to my knees and prayed to the gods. I am one who offers prayer and gratitude to the gods who have created the world. Almighty King and Queen of the endless skies, O God of darkness, Sixantra, O Goddess of light, Burbest Brady, O mighty eternal 5 who rule the mortal realm, O Goddess of water train, O God of fire Ladenshaft, O Goddess of wind Shutsaria, O Goddess of earth Geduld, O God of life Avaglave, hear my prayer, grant me the wisdom of Mastanora. Okay, here we go, the Book of Mastanora. The 7 lights surrounding me shot up into the sky, then an instant later more light started flooding down on me, and fresh knowledge poured into my mind. I tried to repel it at first, but Gramps sharply rebuked me. Do not resist, he said, accept it all. Fill your vessel and allow not a single drop to spill. Become one with Mastanora's wisdom. I did my best to loosen up and absorb as much of the knowledge flowing into me as possible, fighting back the urge to protest that it wasn't in a readable form. This wasn't the end of the world, I thought. I could just need to turn it into a book myself. I'm going to print all this knowledge one day. Bring it on! I was ready for whatever the light wanted to throw at me, or so I thought. In a problematic development, the God's knowledge from the Bible started mixing with the apocryphal stories from Dunkelfelger's history book. Come on, Rosemine, organize it. Don't mix Libeskel's pranks with Lutrane's love stories and a bunch of prayers. But I now know more about Gramps, at least. He's Wehrman, the god of life's former subordinate, who helped arrange his superior's marriage to the goddess of Earth. He's the one who left and took Mastanora with him. Okay. He looks exactly the same as he did when Jurgen Schmidt was founded. Talk about faking one's age. A lot of this knowledge flooding into my mind was valuable, but even more of it was miscellaneous trivia. It was all arriving in such a jumbled mess that I can only assume it had never been organized in the first place. Now I understand why transcriptions are so important. No wonder our distant forebears found it necessary to put the knowledge a Zent would need on stone slates, or pass it down to the Bible. All this trivia is useless without some kind of search function. All sorts of critical intelligence shot into and then out of my mind. How the first Zent made the duchy's foundation, the role of the temple at the time, details regarding the Bibles given to high bishops, that the Zent performed mana replenishment all across Jurgensmith while circling the net country gates, and... Wait, stop flowing, that bit seemed really important. It might let Lady Georgine steal Ehrenfest's foundation. Do not think, Irwin said the instant I tried to backtrack. Accept it all, otherwise you will end up spilling some. As seriously urgent and seriously important as that information had seemed, I wasn't allowed to dwell on it. Doing so would prevent new knowledge from entering my head. My mind needed to be blank to make space for everything. It's surprisingly hard not to think about anything, especially when something so important just seized my attention. You can look at it later. Or think about it later. How was this abundance of valuable information going to be of any use to me when I couldn't slow down to work my way through it? The Grucheshite was whatever physical form a Zent candidate gave to the knowledge bestowed upon them, but surely I would still need a search function to navigate it all. Following the biblical stories and information about the temple was a history of the country's Zents. There were gaps, though. For some reason, Jurgen Smith's past was coming to me in pieces. To give an example, I glimpsed a bedridden Zent giving his Grucheshite to his son and trusting him to open the country gates. Then there was an abrupt cut, and the next thing I saw was another prince mortified that his Grucheshite had disappeared. I couldn't tell whether the two scenes were from the same era, much less whether they were connected in some way. The entire experience was like trying to watch a video with spotty internet or trying to watch a TV while someone else kept changing the channel. In any case, it was unpleasant and deeply frustrating. Worst of all, the gaps started appearing in other places too. A ritual made by a leader's ent to enrich duchies and a portion of the magic circle created for it were covered in black splotches, as were some of the rituals and magic circles I'd seen in the underground archive. I'm not resisting anymore, so show me everything. Give me a clear view, I'm really curious now. My desperate pleas went unanswered. The light raining down on me vanished, and the information streaming into me suddenly stopped. My mind was saturated with knowledge as though I'd just consumed an entire stack of books, and the sensation left me somewhat lightheaded. Well done, Overlord said. You may rest. I shall thank you, I replied. Then I pretty much collapsed, the world around me spinning so ferociously that even sitting down was unbearable. So I scrunched my eyes shut and pressed my head against the ground. Trying to organize my thoughts felt like an insurmountable task. Still, looking at all the knowledge I'd received, I could instinctively tell that somewhere between 30 to 40% was missing. Was I unable to absorb it all then? I'd certainly tried to. Maybe my vessel or whatever have you hadn't been large enough and some of the knowledge had spilled out. That was disappointing. Irwerman, I said, should I have used a divine title or something kind to address him? Why does Mestanora's knowledge contain so much information about Zents and subs and alms, but basically none about lay nobles or commoners? As those who have staffs and an adequate amount of mana turn into face stones, their knowledge is added to Mestanora's wisdom. So she gathered the memories of the country's Zents and Obs only when they died. That explained why there hadn't been much information from after the Purge, and why there hadn't been any about commoners. I wasn't sure how long I'd spent on the ground. All of a sudden, I simply regained consciousness. I opened my eyes and sat up, holding my still spinning head. Part of me wanted to sleep for a while longer, but I couldn't stay here forever. As far as my retainers were concerned, I'd suddenly disappeared while supplying mana to the statue in the library. They must have been worried sick. Who knows how long you've been gone? Because this might not be in, like last time where you were in there and you came out right at the same time as you left. So, who knows? I picked up my hair ornaments, which were scattered across the ground, and quickly fixed my hair with my rainbow hair stick, as I'd always done. In my commoner days, I doubted I would stay in place without gel, but this was better than nothing. Irwerman, I came here to read, I grumbled, but not only were there no books, but the knowledge bestowed upon me was full of gaps. This is incredibly disappointing, the biggest disappointment of my life, even. I pulled on the belt holding my high-base face stone and rejuvenation potions, and stuffed what remained of the socks I'd sliced open into one of my bags. I couldn't just leave it all. Then I momentarily removed my high bishop robes. I recalled that light face stone armor pretty much eliminated the need for a bra or any other supportive undergarment, so I formed some over my underwear. This feels good. Now I could start getting dressed again. I'd severed the back straps of my clothes in my rush to get rid of them, but that was fine. A few cuts from the armpits to the underarms, or to the upper arms, made them wearable again. My new height meant that the dress now looked more like a high-waist one-piece, and the cut straps left a truly shameless hole. But there was no other way for me to fill out my high bishop robes and make sure the necessary lace was showing through the sleeves and such. Once that was done, I put my robes back on. I carefully retied the sash, which made me look reasonably well dressed. Nobody would be able to tell my clothes were in tatters underneath. Yeah, they're going to be able to tell when they take them off. All that remained were my feet. I'd only ever practiced turning face stones into shoes that matched my armor in class, but this was better than exposing my bare feet. My ceremonial robes were long enough to hide them in any case. You were the first person to express disappointment after obtaining Mestanora's wisdom, Irwerman remarked. You received the rest before, did you not? You need only combine them. The blood drained from my face and the half-more face stone slipped into my hands. God, that's right, he's mistaking me for someone else. In truth, I said, this is our first meeting. I certainly do not recall any others. Surely that's not the case. I could never forget our first encounter. So he said, but I still never met him before. He seemed adamant that he was right, so I repeated that he was mistaking me for someone else. Can you tell me more about the person who was here before me, I asked. They were a fool who knew nothing of manners. You will need to be more precise than that. You said that they did not use the proper route to get here. How did they arrive then? It was some casual chatter while they reinformed my shoes and finished getting ready to leave. The incident in question had taken place over a decade ago, apparently. Someone had visited the Royal Academy shrines during the latter half of the Civil War, created the giant magic circle that hung in the sky above, then somehow managed to reach Irwerman. As it turned out, the massive circle was necessary to obtain the Book of Mestanora, as it allowed Irwerman to turn from a tree into the shape of a human and to communicate with the gods. One could not speak with the Irwerman without first activating the circle, which was why he had remained a tree when I obtained my staff, and when I visited again during the ceremony for divine protections. The person who had come here a decade ago had also met the golden shoe after pouring mana into the statue in the library. This is where our stories diverged, though. This mysterious figure had ultimately been turned away for not having activated the giant magic circle, so they had taken action to change that. Not by holding a dedication ritual in the farthest hall, by blasting it with an immense amount of mana from the sky. Wow! And they flew in from above, Ewerman recalled, looking as rigid as ever as his face turned toward the sky. I gazed up as well. He was evidently confusing me with this bad-mannered individual who had arrived through the hole meant for communicating with the gods. I would never do anything of the sort, I protested. You are mistaking me for someone else. I mean, I did consider dropping a huge face stone on the circle from above, but I decided against it. I considered the danger. Some individuals do have similar mana, Ewerman said. A newborn baby and its mother had almost exactly the same mana, as did two lovers experiencing the height of their passion, but this parallel was only temporary. In the case of two parents, the father's influence on the mother would slowly fade, allowing her mana to return to its usual color, while their child would continue to have the mana it was born with. Even among siblings, there were variations in the amount of mana their father contributed during each pregnancy. They were also likely to obtain different protections based on their deeds while growing up. However, he continued, even if two people were to have similar mana, it is unthinkable that they would receive the same divine names from the supreme gods. How could you be different people? Wait, you two received the same names? So you both have the same names for the supreme gods. Oh, so there's different names for the supreme gods for each person. Okay, so that confirms that. I was actually wondering that. So my mana was similar to that of whoever had come here before me, and we received the same divine names from the supreme gods. That was why Ewerman couldn't tell us apart. How were you able to obtain your staff? Ewerman asked. Someone who is nearly identical to another in these regards should not have been able to acquire one. That might be because the Royal Academy's curricula were changed. I received my staff in my first year before I was granted mana names by the supreme gods. I must have been sufficiently unique in that time. If what Ewerman had said was true, then I'd only been able to obtain a stat because I made the journey in my first year. Had we followed the old curricula and waited until after we'd received names from the supreme gods, I might have been mistaken for someone else and refused a staff entirely. Ooh, that was close. I see. Then you are a child marked by Abiglabe. What does that mean? The answer lies among the knowledge you were granted from your Book of Mestanora. Or from your Book of Mestanora. I couldn't help but harumph in response. Ewerman had just told me to figure it out myself. As it stood, finding anything in particular among that mountain of unorganized information was impossible. I needed something with a search function. I produced my staff, closed my eyes, and envisioned the Book of Mestanora I'd seen in the arms of the statue's library. The form I desired arose in my mind alongside a magic circle. I already knew which spell to chant. The Zents who'd flooded into my thoughts had shown me. Grutashite, I said. On command, my staff turned into the Book of Mestanora. It was much smaller than the divine instrument I'd seen the statue holding, about the size of a standard paperback, and took the shape of an electronic tablet so that I could use its search function. That rectangle of mana is rather small, Ewerman observed. Will you be able to read from it? This is the perfect size. Anything bigger would feel uncomfortable. I'm looking for the mark of Abiglabe, right? I entered the keywords with my fingers. Children with the mark of Abiglabe had mana despite having been born among commoners and came back from the brink of death time and time again. Oh! So essentially the kids with the devouring. Okay. I get it. Always managing to escape Abiglabe's grasp. They ultimately ended up with the mana clumps of a dead person even though they were alive. I dissolved those clumps with the Dereve, but I guess that's true. Those with the devouring were faintly omni-elemental, with only one element having the slightest bit stronger, depending on where they were born. To be more specific, the determining factor was the sigil carved into the nearest country gate. In Ehrenfest, that was wind. In Klassenberg, it was earth. In Doggelfelger, it was fire. In Ahrensbach, it was darkness. In Hochschlitz, it was water, and in Glissenmeyer, it was light. Those born in the sovereignty were more likely to have life as their strongest element. Incidentally, according to the Book of Mestanora, the sigil of the god of life was located at the very center of Jürgensmith. The country was circular because it was in reality a massive magic circle that acted as a seal to contain his power. Holy shit! We don't need that to go away! We really don't need that to go away! Just how much does Ewerman resent Abiglabe? Putting those thoughts aside, I returned to the matter at hand. Children with the devouring weren't influenced by their parents' mana, which explained why they were born omni-elemental. They needed to make their own color by praying to the gods and obtaining divine protections. If they didn't and married without any affinities, they would instead be influenced by the mana of their partner. Rather than being a mutual exchange, it would end up a one-sided sweep. But even then, their mana wouldn't be completely dyed. Over time, the external's mana's influence would fade. unless one had the mana clumps of the deceased within them, so it was true for those with the mark of Avoglabe. Said clumps were akin to having face stones within one's body. And if someone managed to completely dye them, their influence would not fade much at all. The person who was dyed would end up with mana identical to that of the person who had dyed them, albeit not quite as strong. So the difference between Dirk and me was that he was a normal devouring child, whereas I had the mark of Avoglabe. Dirk's metal was only barely colored, whereas mine was firmly omni-elemental. That made sense, but doesn't that mean my mana really has been dyed? It was clear to me now. Ferdinand had dyed my mana when searching through my memories back in my Shrine Maiden days. He had used the synchronization potion, which would normally have put us on the same position as Wilfred and Sylvester, or Matthias' group and the knights in charge of viewing their memories, but because I had the mark of Avoglabe, the influence on my mana had remained. So much for everyone telling me it would only last a month. Yeah, thanks a lot, Ferdinand. Bet he wasn't expecting that. Or maybe he was, who knows? Ferdinand completely dyed my mana. Wait, does that mean he was the rude fool Ewerman had been telling me about? What on earth was he doing? Those revelations were coming so suddenly that I was struggling to comprehend them. My head was actually starting to spin. Does that description seem familiar? Ewerman said. Indeed, I replied with a nod. It would seem that I am marked with Avoglabe. My mana was once dyed, but I am not the person who dyed me. We aren't even the same gender. Shouldn't that be obvious at a glance? Mana has no gender. What? But our voices and our speech patterns. Could you tell the gender of a beast from its barking? Our communication is possible only because I can read your intentions through the word sounds you make. I didn't want to admit it, but he made a good point. I wouldn't be able to distinguish a cat by its mewling. The language I speak is not the same as yours, Ewerman continued. Were I not using this method to communicate with you, how would we pass on our knowledge or express our wills? You two are merely having intent projected upon the sounds I make. In essence, it was like everything we were saying was being machine translated for each other. Subtle details like feminine or masculine speech were impossible to notice, and any similarities between how Ewerman and Ferdinand spoke were mere projections based on the comparisons I'd drawn between their expressions. Ewerman, is there anything an Avoglabe-marked child who was dyed before coming of age should know or be careful about? I asked, not wanting to experience yet another disaster because of my circumstances. I cannot say nothing for certain about such a rare experience, but I would expect their situation to be the same as that of a child dyed by its parents. Not a very reliable answer. He continued, the mana of the person who dyed you has become the basis of your own. This will change naturally when you marry and another person starts to influence you. You were dyed by Quinta, I assume. I shook my head, having never heard that name before. Ferdinand was the one who dyed me. That does not make any sense. Come here and touch my form. I will observe your memories. I obediently stood up and went over to Ewerman, or at least I tried to. I tripped over my own feet before I could get very far at all. My body didn't feel right anymore. I would need to practice before going home, or else I would make a fool of myself. What are you doing? Ewerman asked. I grew so much so suddenly that I'm not used to my new body. I see. Hurry up. Come on, you're the one who did this to me, without even consulting me, might I add. The least you can do is acknowledge my complaints. My legs wavered, but I eventually managed to reach Ewerman. My eye level was much higher than when I'd first arrived. I was unsure where to touch him, so I opted just to press my hand against his. Indeed, it was Quinta who dyed you, Ewerman said. Do you mean Ferdinand? In the same way that your true name is mine, he dryly replied. That was evidence enough that he really could read my memories. Well, I wouldn't expect anything less from a former god. As that thought ran up through my mind, Ewerman continued in a murmur. This is a convenient opportunity. In what way? The Book of Messinora is split between you and that fool who intruded on the place with no appreciation for wisdom and resisted the flow of knowledge. You may have the same mana as he, but you came here by the proper means, which makes you better suited to serve as its holder. Seek the lost portion of the book. Ewerman began morphing back into an ivory tree. At the same time, the way out of the Garden of Beginnings reappeared, as if urging me to leap through it. I don't know what you mean, I said. Thou who seekest all wisdom, kill the fool and retain the missing knowledge that you from his face stone. Thou shalt become a Zent in the truest sense. What? I don't want to do that, I shouted, but my words fell on deaf ears. Ewerman finished transforming and said nothing else. I now stood alone in the Garden of Beginnings, staring up at the ivory tree. Light streamed through its many branches. No, I said firmly. I didn't care whether Ewerman was listening. I want knowledge to save Ferdinand, so why would I even think about killing him? From the bottom of my heart, I want to read all the books in the world, but there isn't a price I'm willing to pay. If all I need is a complete Grutashite, there are other ways to get one. I'm assuming you could probably get him to write down all the knowledge he got from the Grutashite, and then you could keep it. essentially. You know? I mean, hello? I practiced walking for a bit, looked around to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything, then put the Garden of Beginnings behind me. I'm back! Okay. Okay, I'm gonna have to end this off here, guys. What's it gonna be like now that she's back? Because she's not in the last place she was, so time must have passed between when she disappeared and now. How much has passed, though, we don't know. We'll have to wait and see in the next video. And I'll work on that, and I'll see you guys in the next one.